Let's talk Trek, because once more, oh my green gawny goodness, am I eager to talk about Trek again, and this week's episode of Strange New Worlds in particular. It is a superb episode of Star Trek in every glorious tradition of classic Trek, and rather interestingly, might be the best blending yet of so-called new Trek sensibilities and the best of old school Star Trek. This episode is so good, it just might be the very best episode of Star Trek we have had in at least a decade and a half or more, maybe even 2 full decades depending on how much you love Enterprise's best episodes. Spoiler rule is in effect, of course. I'll assume at this point you're on board with the show by now, you've seen the episode and you've come here to see some perspectives and see if we're on the same page, or if we have some interesting viewpoints or insights to bat about between one another. Hello again, I am Blunty, and this week's Star Trek Strange New Worlds is entitled Memento Mori. Remember, Death is the title of this episode, and that's all kinds of ominous, and a very, very perfect name for this episode. Now, before we dive into how it all unfolds, let's take a moment to recognise the pattern being set up here. 4 episodes, there's a pattern. And by that I mean it has no pattern. In proper classic Trek style, each episode so far is sitting within its own little genre. But it's also blended with the modern TV expectation of a sense of character continuity. While each week's plot has been separate and self-contained in its own little episode so far, within its own little mini-genre, without a hint of some big tedious season-long impending doom arc that we get with other recent Trek shows. But we're still seeing ongoing character development and growth, the kind the Voyager writers always kept trying to do, but the network kept effing them over. And it's the kind that Deep Space Nine eventually got to do over the screaming, flailing protests of the network and concerns about out-of-order airing and syndication. It's a nice balance being struck between serialized sensibilities and a clean episodic format that can stand on their own 2 feet. But this is not the blending of old and new Trek I was talking about in the opening. We'll have to walk to my point on that one, so let's dig in. So we open as tradition dictates with some quick exposition about the current mission, the current location, this time from the log of Security Chief La'an. Now they're on a mission to deliver some important doohickey, some medicine, food, supplies, machinery, whatever. It doesn't actually matter. It's a bit of classic Star Trek MacGuffin work to tell you why the Enterprise is where it is, who they're visiting, and if there are any stakes involved. This time, it's a remote colony. They need a new air filter. Apparently, they've left things so late in the game, they're weeks away from an unbreathable atmosphere suffocating everybody. Seems like some pretty shoddy colony management to me, leaving things that late in the game for everyone's about to suffocate in weeks away, and if there's one air conditioner doesn't get 2 in time, everyone's dead. But that's not actually the core conflict. None of it actually matters at all in the ongoing plot. We also get a bit of a framing device to set the tone. It's Starfleet Remembrance Day, where it seems it's tradition to not only recognise and honour Starfleet personnel who have fallen in the line of duty, but for those who've served aboard other ships where they've lost fellow crewmates, to wear a little insignia of their ship in remembrance. Except La'an decides not to wear the emblem of the SS Puget Sound, the ship she was on when its entire crew were snatched up by a mysterious hostile alien race and sent to a planet to be snacks for the mysterious alien monsters. So she's got a bit of wildly severe trauma up in here. La'an decides it's best not to dwell, and when she gets to the bridge, Una, who best of all knows the mind-shattering horror of what La'an went through as a child, instantly accuses La'an of not wearing an insignia. You know, you're not wearing an insignia. What's up with that? Bit insensitive, Una. Conform to social expectations and be reminded of your dead family all day long. If you don't, you're being super duper weird. Conform to social expectations. La'an. So Enterprise arrives at insert name colony, doesn't matter, turns out, bit of a ghost town thing going on. No one's picking up the phone. Spock thinks a nearby brown dwarf whipping around a black hole might be chucking out some interference for communications, but nope, quick check, it's not the issue. Just a Chekhov's planet back there in the background. We'll come back to that later. So no sign of anyone, no one hanging around the planet. The colony's communications satellite got all banged up and I can't quite tell how or why. So it's away team time to go down and see what's up. Might be a bit hostile down there, so better take the big guns along with you, just in case. Also, better take some cool new recon protective suits with lights on either shoulder, so if there is a hostile force down there, you'll have both hands free, and they will be able to kill you really, really quick by aiming at your precious head, which is conveniently right between the 2 lights. Just aim here. Very pragmatic stuff. Like, no need to let anyone suffer from poorly aimed shot to the shoulder or something and slowly bleeding to death on the floor. Just to beg for headshots instead. Nice, quick, clean death. Make it easy. 2 big lights, shoot between them, job done. So, colony is a total mess. Lots of blood, no bodies. Ooh, what's going on? Uh-oh, unidentified ship shows up in orbit. Pike whips the away team back immediately. And I do mean immediately. They're back on board before he has time to take his next breath after giving the order to get them back. Which is strange, because usually in episodes that start like this, the crew is stranded for a bit. And the mystery ship jams up communications or blocks transporters or plops themselves right between the planet and the Enterprise to block them sort of going down in a shuttlecraft and getting them and things like that. I've mentioned this in a couple of previous episode reviews, but they keep doing it and it's wonderful. Setting up familiar Star Trek tropes and just tweaking them enough to give your expectations a little jab in the side without just totally subverting them for the sake of subverting them with an, oh, we did the exact opposite of what you're expecting, gotcha, rug pull kind of gimmick. That's lazy writing. So, it turns out the mysterious ship is full of survivors from the attack that decimated the colony. Things whip along a bit with a little bit of wildly convenient plot devices, like a ship that won't let transporters work, so they have to use a little bridge, and the classic trope of that one little kid who all the grown-ups ignore, just as the ramblings of a traumatized and imaginative dumbass child telling stories about monsters in the dark. Except for that one Starfleet person who's all, hey kid, describe the monsters to me. Oh my god, I know exactly what that is. Luckily, I'm the only person on the ship, or in fact in the entirety of Starfleet, that would recognize what you're describing as a very specific alien threat that I am the only person to have ever survived an encounter with, so I know what they sound like, blah blah blah. Very convenient. The writing in the rush to get to the meat of the episode is a bit lazy to say the least, but handled with enough care in performance and pacing that it does play out with the intended emotional, tensional triggers. Right down to the well-worn trope of the usually unflappable officer suddenly freezing up in uncharacteristic horror at the realization about what's coming for them. It's the Gorn. La'an damn near poops her pants at this realization because the kid has described the monster from her own childhood horrors. The Gorn are here. And I say tiny pants because I didn't think I ever really noticed until now just how tiny La'an is until later in the episode where we see Spock kneel down next to her and put his seemingly hubcap-sized hand over her teeny tiny scale model of a human face, which did take me out of the episode somewhat because the size difference between those two people is immense. So I looked it up. Turns out Christina Chong is just 1.6 meters tall, or 5'3". Ethan Peck, tidy 6 foot. Now, in a video I made at the start of the week about Star Trek continuity, lore and canon, specifically when it comes to Strange New Worlds, I suggested that this episode, and we knew the Gorn were coming in this episode, but it might just be handled very much like the Star Trek Enterprise episode that handled their encounter with the Romulans, which happened before Starfleet was supposed to meet the Romulans. I suggested that this episode might just be handled very much like Star Trek Enterprise handled their encounter with the Romulans, who, much like the Gorn at this point, were mysterious to Starfleet, and their first canonical appearance in the eyes of humans happens aboard Kirk's Enterprise, which is at least 10 years in the future from the reference point of this episode. Enterprise handled it very craftily, never really breaking canon, but also using what we know about the Romulans, from our perspective, to generate a wonderfully tense and dramatic episode without ever breaking continuity completely by letting Captain Archer or any of his crew actually see their enemy, so they maintain that in reference to the original series episode. And so it was in this episode. The Gorn remain mysterious and largely unknown, unseen. The larger part of TOS canon remains functionally intact. Instead, all we see is their ships, which inexplicably seem to spin for no useful reason aside from making them visually alien compared to how we're used to seeing ships in Trek move. Aside from that, all we have to go on is their tactical behavior and generalized sense of their psychology when it comes to the hunt. As the episode plays out, it will go unnoticed to exactly 0 true Trekkies that this all feels very familiar and very much like the classic submarine battle episodes of Trek. I imagine when I go looking at the hashtag on Twitter to see other people's reaction, I'll see Balance of Terror from season 1 of the original series mentioned quite frequently, an episode which, as it happens, somewhat poetically, within which we first meet the Romulans and their cloaking technology. And which, to this day, is still regarded as an absolute classic episode of Star Trek, one of, if not the best, original series had to offer. Inspired heavily by the tension-filled submarine warfare movies like The Enemy Below, but instead of an American submarine and a German U-boat, it's the Enterprise versus a Romulan ship. So we see this drama on display, a tactical cat and mouse game, captain versus captain, tactic versus tactic, prediction versus prediction, not in a flurry of violence and aggression, but in a delicate chess play, a kind of battlefield respect for a worthy opponent. It's a gloriously tension-filled episode of Star Trek. And in Strange New Worlds this week, in Memento Mori, we get a tribute to that genre, or a tribute to the tribute, except instead of the crafty and coldly aggressive Romulan warrior tactician, we have a faceless wolf pack lurking in the night, hunting. Every Trek has an episode a bit like this, or uses a gas giant as a deep-sea diving pressure metaphor, sometimes in the same episode. Deep Space Nine has Starship Down, TNG has the Pegasus, Enterprise has Sleeping Dogs, Voyager has Extreme Risk. So Chekhov's planet comes into play, the brown dwarf, and for those of you who are somehow Star Trek fans but are not also somehow astronomy nerds, a brown dwarf is a kind of gas giant planet, a bit like Jupiter, except even more massive. About 70 times more massive, but also not quite massive enough to ignite itself as a star. They are failed stars, substellar objects, and really not the kind of gravity well or environment you want to fly an already damaged spaceship into. Bit of a risk. It is the space ocean. You can hide in it, deep, dark, quiet. Sonar, your only way of seeing. Passive sonar, your only hope of going undetected by the enemy. But you can't dive too deep or the pressures will crush you like a grape. Which is exactly why Pike orders the Enterprise into it, in an act of desperate cockiness that has twinges of Kirk chipping off at the edges. If they want us, they're gonna have to take a big fat brave pill too and come get us. And without knowing a single thing about the construction, the technology, the capabilities or limits of the enemy spaceships, he's all just like, yeah, Enterprise is a Chad-class spaceship. We'll be fine. They're not going to come in and risk it. Futurama kind of ruined this trope for me a bit in an episode that takes their ship into an actual ocean here on Earth. And as they go deeper and deeper and deeper, the question arises of exactly how much atmospheric pressure can the ship actually withstand? And the answer is, well, it's a spaceship. So anywhere between 0 atmospheres and 1. Farnsworth's line always creeps into my mind as I watch episodes like this that are descending into, pressurized environments on planets. And so it goes. The cat and mouse game plays out. Pike does some clever stuff to destroy the enemy ship with extremely limited options and resources, thanks to all the damage they took while escaping in the first place to the brown dwarf. Except the Gorn are canny. They're smart. They are ruthlessly pragmatic in their hunting tactics. They didn't have just one ship. They sent one ship into either get the job done or, in their failure, expose the Enterprise for the rest of the pack. They used an entire ship of their own people as an active decoy. And from the minute the Gorn ship first shows up, the tension is unrelenting in this episode and never stops, slowly escalating beat by beat. It just gets tenser and tenser and tenser. The whole core plot is about learning the enemy, a constant series of dramatic reversals. Oh no, a mysterious ship. Oh good, it's friendlies. It's a rescue mission. Oh no, they were bait. Time to fight. Oh no, we're heavily damaged and the foe is unrelenting. Time to hide. Oh no, if we hide, we lose all senses and shields and a whole bunch of the ship has to be turned off just to survive the hiding spot. Oh good, Spock has figured out a clever way to turn the atmospheric churn of the gas giant into a kind of sonar to detect the enemy ship. Oh no, they're coming right for us. Oh good, they can't actually see us. They went right past. Time to go on the offensive. Here's a new clever idea to use a torpedo as a depth charge. Just to hammer home the submarine metaphor a bit heavier. Oh no, it was a trap all along, and now they know where they are, and more ships are coming for us that we didn't even know were there. So there's the macro drama of Pike trying to outwit the ruthless Gorn, and at every victory and instant turn being put back on the defensive in an ongoing escalation of tactical reversals. It's very tense, very exciting. And then there's the twin counterpoint stories to juxtapose the Gorn's cold reptilian indifference. We have Una in sickbay, severely injured in the initial attack. Most of the sickbay tech is balked by severe damage and power loss. Medical supplies are destroyed, and in another callback to something I spoke of in my lore and canon video, we have a specific mention of matter synthesizers. Replicators arose by any other name, which technically shouldn't be a thing yet. But there's a mention of them being broken too, so replicating replacement medical supplies is just out of the question. They've got to make do with what they have. The Unas comp some shrapnel in the guard. They're old schooling it with triage and stitching her up. But there's one more piece, and it's got to come out before septic shock sets in. Problem is, it's severed a major artery. So she'll bleed like a stuck pig when they yoink it out, and they will need the very last pack of plasma they have to replace the blood that's going to gush everywhere. But another crew member starts crashing and also needing a transfusion to save their life. Una, without hesitation, orders the doctor to give it to them, not her. Classic Star Trek command decision. The ship comes first. The crew is the highest priority. And unlike the last episode, I don't hate Una this time. This is exactly what every last one of Starfleet officers would have done in her place, except for Worf. If the one needing his blood was a Romulan, because, you know, those petaks. But yeah, thematically showing how humans, and Starfleet more broadly, value the safety of others as a higher goal, as an ideal, and laid against the Gorn who just kind of Zap Brannigan their way through life, sending wave after wave of his own men against the enemy until they hit their preset kill limit. That's 2 Futurama references I've managed in this video. And the resolution to Una's predicament of all her blood being on the floor instead of more important places like her organs, old Doc Beardface goes old school with a blood transfusion directly from himself to her, literally giving of oneself to help another survive. Doesn't get more Starfleet. Then we also have Hemmer and Uhura doing more classic Trek things, trapped in a room with a thing that will very much explode the absolute crap out of the place unless it's diffused very, very carefully. And the one person with the best skill set for the job is injured and has to talk someone with the wrong skill set how to defuse a big pile of very, very dangerous explodey stuff before it does the explodey thing. More shades of DS9's Starship Down, or indeed Enterprise's Minefield, another really good episode from that show. The only problem here is it was damn obvious what was going to happen with this plot device. We know neither Uhura or Hemmer are going to die, because we know Uhura survives many more years, and we know they're not going to just nuke Hemmer for the sake of it this early on without really learning anything about him to emotionally connect to. So when he does die, if he does die, it means something on screen. We also already know the weapons are down and Pike has just used the very last torpedo, and here's a big, huge explosive device that will inevitably explode. So, gee whiz, I wonder what's going to happen to Chekhov's nuke. In any case, the point of the situation is Hemmer learning to rely a bit more heavily on others, to work as a team, to rely on your shipmates, because that's what Starfleet is. Cooperation, communication, coordination. But Hemmer doesn't like that stuff. It's a fairly well-handled whack at a trope. See, it's not uncommon for people with what others would regard as disabilities to become fiercely independent in a refusal to let their perceived diminished capability and capacity in some way makes them reliant on other people. They need constant help. We've seen hints of this already from Hemmer, as exasperated and relatively patient as he has been when the issue of his blindness comes up with people like Uhura here. His lack of a visual sense, which, for the record, is entirely normal for his entire subspecies. He's not disabled. Every last Aenar is blind, born that way, so really not a disability from his perspective or his entire culture's perspective, just the human perspective. And if you ever try and push someone's wheelchair who has not very, very specifically asked you to do that, you will find out very rapidly and in no uncertain terms that self-reliance and personal agency is kind of a big deal when you live a life where other people kind of constantly assume you always need help with basic shit because you don't work the same way they do. Sometimes it gets to a place where asking for help or accepting it when offered can be more difficult than you'd imagine because you've kind of internalized along the way. So, we see that in Hemmer here. Years of being around sighted species in Starfleet through his training and through his career so far has probably made him quite annoyed at people who constantly see him as lesser, as disabled, and keep offering to help where none is needed or requested. But now he is genuinely disabled by an injury that takes away the use of his hand, the tool of an engineer. So he needs to accept help this time and work as a team, relying on and trusting in others if they're going to survive this together. And it's another counterpoint to the Gorn's behavior. Only with them, working as a hunting pack is their teamwork. And the weak and vulnerable get, well, they get shot up like 100 times without the slightest hesitation and die in the cold, unfeeling, sucking vacuum of space because they're weak and useless. So it's better to get them out of the way than help them, because the hunt will suffer if you have to deal with those guys and their pathetic weakness. Which is where we come back to La'an, paired up with Spock. Both characters are pragmatic and deliberate, but opposed on their decision-making styles. Spock, of course, is all about cold, calculated logic. La'an relies more on gut instinct and survival reflexes honed to an edge by extreme trauma early on in her life. And here is where we get to the blending of the Kirkman-era Trek and the classic Trek stuff I was talking about. And it's a blend that is finally done justice. It is finally in the right proportions. It is finally balanced properly. Discovery has caught a lot of flack for being way too indulgent on the hyper-focused on individual emotions and personal trauma stuff and just dwelling on it for far too long. Michael is always goddamn crying about some shit, which is weird for a kid raised on Vulcan, where the ability to control your own emotions so you can get important shit done is kind of part of the whole curriculum of growing up there. Much less someone trained by Starfleet to keep their damned head while under pressure because literally hundreds of other lives depend on them, not weeping like a child every time things get a bit much. In season 4 of Disco especially, there's a lot of time on screen devoted to basically counselling sessions. And for the most part, it's done well, or at least better than they did in the previous seasons. They're saying some important stuff about trauma and identity and feelings and lots of validation and a responsible way to deal with the trauma and to help others do so without overstepping or trying to solve their issue for them, things like that. And while it's written with sensitivity, it brings the whole damn show to a screeching, grinding halt of tedious, slow, whisper-talking and exhaustively elongated exposition about exactly how okay it is to have feelings and how the right way to process them is. And that's just not very Trek. It's not good Trek, it's not even good sci-fi, it's barely good teen angst drama show. Here in Strange New Worlds though, we see a sensitivity to how trauma, like PTSD, is treated with the kind of consideration it deserves, without allowing it to bog down the actual show, or the pacing, or the plot, or the tension, like it does so frequently in Discovery. And it handles the mental health issues better than most classic Trek shows have done. Some of those have been anything from awkward and cringy to simply dangerously misguided. But La'an has some deeply scarred emotional damage from her childhood experience of being a Gorn captive and being intended to be hunted and eaten by a bunch of Gorn kids. Every last person she knew got Gorn chomped. So that'll make you a bit tense. And it's seriously affecting her ability to focus and work this time. Her biggest fear is out there, hunting her again, and it's really messing her up. Till now, she's managed to bury it, refused to allow herself to feel like a victim, denied she needs help to process it. She's dealing with it fine on her own terms, and doesn't want to blither about with a mind doctor. Thank you very much. I'm tough enough to do this. Pretty damn common trauma response, especially for survivors of violent trauma, and also ties into the stuff I was talking about with Hammer and a heightened sense of self-reliance so others don't ever see you as vulnerable or lesser ever again. So instead of sitting in a room talking about it for 7 excruciatingly slow on-screen minutes like Discovery would have done, they use it as a plot device. They use it to move things forward. La'an is suppressing much of her experience, but she feels like there's something she can use there. So mind meld time, she says to Spock. Recovering buried or poorly recorded or actively suppressed memory is a mind meld trick we've seen pretty much in every Star Trek with a Vulcan on board. But Spock is reluctant. A mind meld is not a shortcut to avoid dealing with this crap properly, he tells La'an rather responsibly. But she's pragmatic about it. She knows this. She doesn't want instant catharsis from magic mind meld trickery. She doesn't even want to deal with this crap at all, really. She wants context. She needs context, not for herself, but for pragmatic practicality. She needs to dig up what she thinks she knows about the Gorn so she can use it against them and help save everybody. Now, the trigger for all this is 2 Gorn ships using ship-to-ship laser communication, or some variation of that concept anyway. The problem I have with this, though, is threefold. Firstly, if you're gonna do that, maybe choose a wavelength of light that isn't in the common visual spectrum, so it's a bit more covert. The whole point of line-of-sight laser or tight beam communication is it increases security, so if you want to intercept it, you have to literally intercept it by being in between the sender and the receiver. Secondly, it's revealed they're using some kind of Morse code, which is bizarrely analog for a spacefaring species. Surely a binary encoded fast burst data stream would be like a gazillion times more efficient and even more secure because you can encode it super easily and it would last just a quick burst instead of several seconds worth of conversation. Finally, the absolute dumbest shit about this is, in the repressed memory La'an is recovering, her brother has decoded this communication method. Plausible enough. Some people are just good at that. Except it's literally Morse coded to the English alphabet, spelling out English words. It's all in his notes. Right down to the alphabet. So just get the frack out of here. Just get out. Go, leave, dumb, stupid, implausible, ridiculous, shattering any suspension of disbelief I could possibly have for this concept. The first 2 issues were bad enough. The third one just sinks it completely as an entire concept. Anyway, the point is, this all blends some Kirkman-era stuff and his predilection for a focus on people dealing with mental trauma in explicit and ongoing ways, paired up and meshed quite nicely with what real Trek would have done, and that is move the plot forward, and remembering that it is in fact a sci-fi show using space magic situations as metaphor and allegory, not a how-to-do excruciatingly dull therapy guide. And I like this blend. I like it a lot. This is how an episodic show with evolving character arcs and relationships, many of whom have looming trauma in their histories, needs to work these days. Use it as a tool for the plot, not work against the plot. And the overhanging theme of the reality of untimely and unexpected death at a job like hurtling through the void of space, where both familiar and unknown threats lay waiting at any moment, inherently is carried from the opening shot of the unworn Remembrance bin right through to La'an finally understanding that even painful reminders of deep loss are important to acknowledge, and not a single one of us is a stranger to loss, and in sharing it, we can find some empathy and understanding. As we get pinned in a tense moment as Spock's loss of his sister is inadvertently picked up by La'an in the mind meld, as the loss of her brother pings off Spock's recent loss of his sister and the trauma he's still dealing with from that. It's a loss he cannot acknowledge to pretty much anyone because it's all tied up in classified MacGuffin stuff. And, of course, so as a Vulcan, of course, it's tied to a deeply felt emotional tide that he must suppress and control, lest he lose control of it altogether. But in this little subtle moment, and in each other, Spock and La'an find empathy and understanding for losses neither one of them can or will choose to talk about openly. It's a quiet, subtle, and deeply affecting moment. It hit me right here. And aside from the wildly dumb logical leap I was expected to make about the Gorn communicating in English Morse code, I loved literally everything else about this episode. It is as close to a perfect episode as we could have hoped for. It took a mysterious alien threat, who till now we've only known as unintentionally hilarious visions of stuntmen in big rubber lizard suits, or as poorly aged CGI effects from a time when CGI really shouldn't have been used for that. And it makes them every bit as imposing and as scary as when we first met the Romulans, or indeed the Borg. They're cunning, cold, frighteningly ruthless, and all without one single line of dialogue from them or even an image of their faces on a screen anywhere. They don't threaten, they don't posture, they don't saber rattle, they don't make grand speeches about how insignificant humans are, or shout across the vacuum of space about how futile resistance might be. They just hunt. We're not an enemy to them. We're food. And this concept does make me wonder if there'll be a recurring thing as the show goes on. It might break canon, but I'd be okay with it, because it could be interesting if they were explored a bit deeper, perhaps in a more careful and nuanced approach to what we saw Voyager do with the Hirogen. They were a metaphor for sports hunters. The Romulans are often stand-ins for jingoistic and proactive nationalism. The Borg, well, the Borg are space zombies. The Gorn, though, are simply natural predators. They don't have an agenda. They just coldly stalk and hunt and consume. Their goal is not domination or expansion of territory or even ideologically political stuff. Their goal is to eat you. You don't throw diplomacy and compromise at them. You run for your life or you fight for your life. Those are the only two options. And through this stark contrast, we see Pike as a tactician. What he's willing to do, how much he's willing to risk, how much faith he has in his ship and in his crew, how fast can he adapt, and even a moment where he is expecting to lose. He's consigned. He's not escaping this, but he will damn well go down swinging on as much of his own terms as he can possibly manage. Screw those guys, they're not taking us easy. But suddenly, his blind gamble pays off. The Enterprise can indeed survive more pressure in the gas giant than the Gorn scout ship is able to. It unexpectedly implodes. Spike is visibly briefly surprised, but instantly starts to confidently capitalize on this lucky gamble, using it to inspire his crew, showing them victory is possible, and leading La'an to follow in his leadership and stand as an example to the crew in her role as standing in first officer, teaching her how to lead and inspire by his own example, all sold with just a look to her. It's brilliant. It's a wonderful moment. Now, I said this of the first 2 episodes that they were pretty solid Star Trek episodes, but I doubt either one will be considered a classic in the long term. And I really didn't like the 3rd episode too much at all. It was kind of a... But this, I think this is the first episode that will absolutely be considered a standout episode of the first season, if not a persevering classic of the show, full stop. The pacing was perfect. It gave time to everything it wanted to say. It never once let up the tension an episode like this needs. It was taut as a violin string from the instant the Gorn ship decloaked to the moment the Enterprise flung out of the accretion disk of the black hole. I was at full and complete attention, absorbed the whole time by the tension and the drama, excited and eager for every beat of the plot as it unfolded. What was the next move? How will the Gorn react? What is Pike's tactical attitude? How well does he understand his enemy? Danger close, danger real, threat imminent. It was solid TV. Like episodes 1 and 2, it all felt very familiar. It used classic Trek tropes and painted with all the right colours of Trek, and still managed to avoid being too predictable. And every character pairing had something valuable to contribute to the story, to the tension, to the theme, and to the characters themselves. And there wasn't a wasted frame of this episode. Everything on screen was there to tell the story, to push it forward, to build the tension. No fluff, no sloppy exposition, no down moments, no pointlessly obscure technobabble, no useless weeping and socking when there's a damn job to be done, goddammit. It is, simply put, my very favourite thing with the word Star Trek in front of it that I've seen in close to 20 years. And yes, Ethan Peck's Spock says sensors, just like Nimoy, so that's fun. Distractingly hitting the ear wrong every time he says it, but just like Nimoy, it's part of Spock. Now all we need to do is for Jim Kirk to pop up in Season 2 and accuse someone of sabotage. 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 How do you say it?
In a deliberate act of sabotage.
Sabotage.
Sabotage the system. I don't say sabotage. You say sabotage. I say sabotage.
He doesn't say sabotage, he says sabotage. Oh, Shatner. Shatner. Moron. Thank you for watching. I am Blunty. Hopefully you found this interesting. I know these are almost as long as the episodes themselves, but I have so much to say about the show, so much I want to express. Thank you if you've made it to the end of the episode. Hopefully it was fun along the way, or interesting or insightful, and I'm interested to hear what you all think about it. Thank you, as always, to the patrons, of course. I am Blunty. Thank you for watching, and we'll catch you next time. Live long and prosper. Nearly forgot it that time. Remember just the last second. No pause this time.